The gallery was quiet. Not because it was empty, it wasn't. The air just had that curated kind of silence. The kind you can feel in your chest. Polished concrete floors, clean white walls, and wine glasses that never quite touched the bottom of the cup. She stepped in with soft shoes. Nobody noticed. Or rather, they noticed, but didn't look long. A black woman, late 50s maybe. Cardigan too warm for the room. A tote bag that looked canvas-worn, not couture. She moved like someone who didn't want to take up space. Like she knew what places weren't made for her. She walked slowly, eyes scanning the art. Her hands stayed at her sides, never close to the work. But before she could reach the second wall, a man approached. Not rude, just fast. Smiling in that way that only looks polite if you're not really watching. "Hi," he said. "Just so you know, the restroom isn't open to the public." She looked at him, not confused, not hurt, just calm. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, adjusting his blazer sleeve. She blinked once, then kept walking. He didn't ask why she was there, didn't ask her name, didn't notice that her eyes lingered on a canvas tucked into the far right corner, the one without a plaque yet. He didn't know what he'd done, not yet, but he would. "I wonder who's watching this quietly. Where you from, city, country? A quiet corner of somewhere. Drop it below. No need to explain. Just let the map unfold. Before the sun reached the windows, before the cafes unlocked their doors, or the delivery vans rumbled down cobbled streets, she was already awake. Lillian Moore lived in a second-floor walk-up above a laundry service. Her apartment smelled like linseed oil, old books, and peppermint tea bags reused one too many times. She liked it that way. It smelled lived in, grounded. Her mornings were quiet, not peaceful, not always, but still. There was something about rising before the noise of the world that gave her clarity. While the city held its breath, she made space for her own. She moved slowly, deliberately. Kettle on. 2 cracked mugs in the cupboard, one chipped, one fine. She always used the chipped one. The good one was for guests, though she hadn't had any in a while. She didn't check her phone. She didn't have a calendar full of meetings, a schedule full of posts, a platform full of followers. But her days were full. She painted, not for fame, not even for sales, most of the time. She painted because something in her hands demanded to be let out. Something quiet and persistent and aching to be seen, even if only by her. The studio was her living room. 2 easels leaned against the wall. Several half-finished canvases rested in corners like sleeping animals. A metal lamp stood on a side table with a single bulb too warm for the room. She liked the warmth. Cool light made the paint lie. On the windowsill, 3 brushes, 1 palette knife, and a dry, folded towel that once had a hotel name embroidered on it, the letters worn away. Her brushes weren't fancy, not expensive, but she kept them clean. Clean tools mattered, even when no one was watching. Lillian didn't look like an artist most people imagined. She didn't wear black turtlenecks. She didn't have a shaved head or oversized glasses, or a curated Instagram grid. She had a soft midsection, dark skin with warm undertones, natural silver in her hair that she never dyed. She wore cardigans, not for style, but because the cold got into her bones these days. She didn't speak much when she painted. She didn't need to. Years ago, someone told her she should sign her work more boldly. That gallery buyers liked a name they could remember, short, catchy, brandyable. But she always signed the same way, L. Moore. Small, bottom right corner. If they wanted to know who she was, they'd have to look a little closer. And most people didn't. Once, back in her 30s, she'd had a solo show in a local community center. 27 pieces, hung in a row with care. People came, drank boxed wine, said warm things. Nothing sold. That was the last time she tried to show her work herself. Since then, she painted quietly, submitted occasionally, and let the world decide if it wanted to find her. Sometimes it did. Most times it didn't. She didn't care much for the art world. Too many opinions. Too many people pretending to be poor in $1,200 boots. She didn't hate it. She just didn't trust it. She trusted the canvas more. The The canvas didn't care where she was from. The canvas didn't care that her hands hurt some mornings, or that the light in her apartment was never quite right. The canvas only cared if she showed up. So she did. Every day. The gallery email had come 3 weeks ago. She'd been accepted into a group show, anonymously. She had submitted under a pseudonym, M.L. Rowan, just for the fun of it. No headshot, no bio, just scans of her work. They replied 3 days later. Your piece is quietly devastating. We'd be honored to hang it. She read the line twice. Quietly devastating. She liked that. They'd picked one of her smaller pieces. A square canvas, muted palette, raw textures, a figure almost disappearing into the background. It had no title. She didn't believe in titling things before they were done. And sometimes, not even then. Still, she agreed. She dropped off the piece in person. Days before the show, unnoticed. No one asked her name. The young man at the front desk took the wrapped canvas with a nod and a clipboard, and she left. That was enough. Lillian wasn't planning to attend the opening. She didn't like crowds. Didn't like the way people spoke loudly in quiet rooms, just to sound important. Didn't like how some folks stood too close to the art, but too far from understanding. But she hadn't ruled it out either. She kept the time and date folded in a slip of paper in her bag, just in case. That morning, as she sipped her weak tea, she looked at the city outside her window. The gallery was 10 blocks east, 3 blocks down. Not far. She imagined space, white walls, spotlights, clean fonts on wall labels, people in pressed jackets holding stemware. She would go, not to be seen, just to see, not to explain herself. Just to stand beside what she made, quietly, fully, without apology. She wore the cardigan with the loose thread at the wrist. Not because she had nothing better. Because it was hers. Because it was enough. As she locked her door and walked down the stairs, the hallway light flickered above her. The one that always flickered. She didn't mind. Some things don't need to be fixed to still work. She stepped outside into the wind, the city pulsing beneath her feet. The canvas was already hanging on a wall she hadn't yet seen. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready to stand beside it, even if no one knew it was hers. The gallery sat on a quiet corner just off the main strip, the kind of street where traffic hummed instead of roared, where boutiques had more plants than people, and the windows were cleaner than most apartments. Lillian arrived 20 minutes after the doors opened. She didn't want to be early, didn't want to be announced. Didn't want to be noticed, really. She just wanted to stand in the room where her work hung, like visiting an old friend who didn't expect you, but wouldn't mind you stopping by. The sidewalk was dotted with high heels and low conversation. Soft jazz played from a speaker mounted above the door. Inside, warm lighting spilled onto white walls. Clean, intentional, measured. She walked in without hesitation. But no one met her at the door. The woman at the front, white, maybe early 30s, hair in a slick bun, all black outfit with a clipboard and a practiced smile, looked up briefly, then backed down at her checklist. No greeting. Lillian stepped quietly to the side. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. The same canvas, one she always carried, slightly faded, fraying at the top seam. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't need to. She already knew what kind of people would be here. She'd seen them before. The ones who stood too close to paintings, wine glass in hand, saying things like emotive texture or post-structural lineage, like they were ordering appetizers. She didn't hate them, but she knew they wouldn't see her. A man brushed past her, middle-aged, linen shirt, thick glasses, without an "excuse me." He walked right through the space she was occupying, as if her presence was more of a temporary inconvenience than a person. She didn't flinch, just stepped back calmly. She was used to being passed through. She wandered further into the gallery, eyes searching, careful not to look like she was searching. She didn't want anyone to think she was lost, even though, technically, she didn't know where her painting was. She paused in front of a large, loud canvas, neon colors, sharp lines. It demanded attention in a way that felt almost desperate. People surrounded it. A woman in a velvet dress said, "This is definitely about reclaiming space." Lillian tilted her head. Maybe. Or maybe it was just about color. Sometimes a painting was just paint. She moved on. Near the back corner of the second room, it happened. She was standing in front of a smaller piece. Subdued, earthy tones, soft edges, textures so detailed, you could see the artist's brush rhythm in the layers. It pulled her in slowly, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. A man approached her. Tall, tan coat, designer scarf. He looked at her, then looked at the painting, then back at her. "You staff?" he asked, pointing a thumb toward the room behind them. She blinked. "No." "Oh," he said, vaguely apologetic, but not enough to mean it. "I thought maybe you were custodial or something." He walked off before she could answer. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. A few minutes later, she reached a smaller alcove, a quiet corner of the gallery, dimmer lit, fewer voices. That's where she saw it. Her painting. There it was. Just as she'd left it, soft, tense, complex in ways you couldn't explain without ruining it. The label below read, Untitled M.L. Rowan. No bio. No story. Just the name. She stood in front of it. No one noticed her, which, for a moment, felt like relief. Then came the second collision. A young woman, tall, white, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, walked by with two friends. She stopped near Lillian, glanced at the piece, then at Lillian, and said, half whispering, "It's so raw. You can tell whoever painted this has been through something." Her friend replied, "Yeah, but are we supposed to care about the sadness, or just the texture?" Lillian stayed still. Then the first girl added, louder this time, "It kind of feels like suffering, but aesthetic. Like whoever made this isn't here, you know. It's like a ghost made it." And then they laughed, soft, careless, moving on as if the room owed them nothing but stimulation. Lillian didn't move. She stood there, in front of the thing she had made, that they were discussing like it was a mood board. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She just watched it happen. Watched them interpret her pain like decor. Watched them dismiss the fingerprints of her past as brushstrokes for sale. And still, she didn't speak. Because speaking would have required them to stop and see her. And they weren't looking. Across the room, the gallery owner appeared. Mid-40s, white, tailored suit with shoes more expensive than her rent. He made small talk with a couple of donors, his hands always moving, his voice always floating just above everyone else's. He didn't notice her. He did, however, notice the corner she stood in, and began walking toward it. She didn't move. He didn't slow down. He approached with the smoothness of someone used to being obeyed. Then, halfway through a sentence to someone else, he saw her, and hesitated. Just a flicker. Then he smiled, that same too polite smile. "Oh, hi, sorry, but could I ask you not to stand too close to the work? We've had some unfortunate incidents before." Lillian didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm not touching anything." "Of course," he replied quickly. "It's just policy, you know." And just like that, he walked off. Didn't ask her name. Didn't ask why she was there. Didn't recognize the signature hanging beside her. She looked back at her painting. Suddenly, it felt farther away. Not physically, spiritually. Like it belonged less now that it was here. A few minutes later, the crowd thickened. A woman in heels nearly knocked into her. A waiter offered champagne to everyone, but skipped her completely. A man asked if she worked for the caterer. No one saw her. Not really. They saw what they expected. But she stayed. Because sometimes, dignity isn't staying where people think you shouldn't be. Sometimes, showing up is the only resistance you need. So she stood, by the painting, by herself, in full view of the people who looked past her, and waited. She didn't leave. Lillian stayed near her painting, in the quiet corner that no one quite considered prime wall space. It was the kind of spot where only the genuinely curious wandered, the ones not just looking to be seen admiring, but actually looking to feel something. There were very few of those, but she didn't mind. That corner felt honest, familiar even. It reminded her of where most of her life had happened, not in the spotlight, but off to the side, in the kitchen, in the hallway, in the waiting room, in places where people paused briefly but rarely stayed. She sat down on a bench across from the painting. No one questioned it. No one looked long enough. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a folded handkerchief, not to wipe anything, just to hold. A nervous habit. Cloth gave her something the room didn't. Texture she could control. She looked at the painting, really looked. It had changed. Not in the brushstrokes, but in the way it was being held by the space. It looked exposed here. Raw, like something sacred laid bare in front of people who wouldn't know what they were looking at, even if you labeled every line. She thought back to the day she painted it. Late fall. The apartment had been cold. Her radiator hadn't kicked in yet. She wore 2 sweaters and fingerless gloves while she worked. That day, something had pressed on her chest like a weight. Not sadness exactly, not grief, just something unspoken. She didn't paint what it felt like. She painted where it had been. The figure on the canvas wasn't meant to be a person, but it was. A woman dissolving into a wall of earth tones. Not vanishing, returning. Not fading, grounding. It had taken her 10 hours. She didn't eat, didn't answer the phone, just painted. And when she'd finished, she sat in silence for a long time, then signed it Elmore. But for submission, she changed it to ML Rowan, just to see if they'd respond to the work, not the name, not the skin. They just didn't know what they were looking at. She sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes. No one joined her. No one asked if she was okay. And that was fine. She didn't need attention. She just needed to witness. To remember what this painting was before the gallery walls, before the wine glasses, before the men in scarves who said things like emotional weight without feeling any of it. And then came the shift. A younger woman, mid-20s, black, short braids, wearing flats and a sharp blazer, walked into the corner, clipboard in hand, staff badge on her hip. She stopped a few feet from Lillian, looking at the painting, then at Lillian, then back again. You could see the flicker. Recognition, not of a person, but of a presence. Something didn't add up. Something did. The woman stepped a little closer. She looked at the brushstrokes, the depth, the palette. Then she looked again at Lillian. "You like this piece?" she asked softly. Lillian gave the smallest smile. "I know it well," she said. The woman tilted her head. "You part of the gallery?" "No," Lillian said evenly. "Not really." The young woman paused, thinking. Then, "You here with someone?" Lillian said nothing, just looked at the painting. The woman looked again too. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, in clarity. She saw it. The artist's photo hadn't been displayed. No biography, no speech scheduled. The gallery had made a choice. Market the work without the person. Keep the mystery. Let the audience fill in the blanks. But now someone was filling them in with something real, something human. The staff member didn't ask anything more. She just stood next to Lillian for a quiet moment. 2 women looking at something only one of them made, and the other finally saw. Then she said, "It's a beautiful piece," and walked away. That moment, small, quiet, unnoticed, was the first time all night someone looked at Lillian and saw something beyond assumption. Not charity, not pity, recognition. Across the room, the gallery owner was speaking with a local critic. He gestured vaguely toward the back corner, toward her painting, saying phrases like emerging talent, raw edge, and untapped voice. He hadn't walked over yet. He hadn't seen her sitting right there. And when he did glance over, briefly, he didn't register who she was. She looked like someone waiting for someone else. Not like the reason they were all here. More people began to wander into the alcove. 2 women, a man and his teenage daughter, all stopping in front of the painting, murmuring things like, "There's something about this one." They didn't know why, but Lillian did. It was hers. The critic finally walked over, with the gallery owner a few steps behind. The critic stared at the painting for a long time. He squinted, stepped back, leaned in. Then he whispered something to the gallery owner. Something complimentary, something transactional. Lillian heard the gallery owner say, "Yes, we're very proud to have her." Her. No name, no direction of who her was. Just a placeholder for the work, for the mystery, for the story he decided to sell without actually knowing it. Lillian stood up slowly, stretched her fingers once, then let them fall back to her sides. She didn't speak, didn't introduce herself. She just stood there, still, steady, a ghost walking her own halls. And no one knew what they just walked past. Her name was Ava, 26, gallery assistant, just over 2 years in, still on hourly pay, still invisible in every monthly staff photo. She handled logistics, artist transport, schedule coordination, press release drafts, everything no one wanted credit for, but everything that held the place up. And tonight, for the first time, she saw the structure crack. It started small, a flicker in the corner of her eye. The older woman in the cardigan wasn't on the guest list. Ava knew the list inside out. She'd made it. She'd printed it. She'd stood at the front with the clipboard for the first hour before handing it off to the intern with the straighter teeth. The woman hadn't checked in, hadn't asked for a name badge, hadn't asked for anything, just wandered, calm, focused, almost invisible. Except she wasn't. Not to Ava. Earlier, she had seen the interaction with Greg, the gallery director. She hadn't heard the words, but she'd seen the posture. Greg leaning in, doing the polite thing he did when he felt someone didn't belong. That half smile that was more performance than welcome. Ava knew it well. She'd seen him use it on delivery drivers, older black men who came to hang installations, the one indigenous sculptor who wore denim instead of linen, anyone who didn't fit the gallery's unspoken dress code of money plus minimalism. She'd seen it used on her own at once when she dropped by to say hello. That smile, it didn't mean you're welcome here. It meant don't stay too long. But this time, the woman hadn't backed away. She didn't argue, didn't explain herself. She just kept standing there, like she wasn't asking permission to exist. That quiet refusal, Ava felt it like a chill. Later, as she passed through the back alcove to replace a tray of empty glasses, she caught sight of the painting. The one that always stopped her when she passed it during install. The one labeled Untitled M.L. Rowan. It had haunted her for days. She didn't know why exactly. It was soft, but not delicate. Heavy, but not bleak. It reminded her of something she couldn't name. A memory that didn't belong to her. And now, that same quiet woman was standing in front of it, not admiring it, not inspecting, just standing, like someone standing at a grave they dug themselves. And Davis suddenly knew. Not because the woman told her, not because she saw a name tag, but because no one stands in front of a painting like that unless they know where it came from, unless they made it. She watched for a long time, from a distance. No clipboard, no camera, just witnessing. The crowd moved around them like current around stone. Everyone busy talking, sipping, performing familiarity. No one noticed the center of the room was no longer where the spotlight hit. It was here, in the shadows. Greg walked past at one point, paused near the painting. He didn't notice the woman, didn't even really look at the piece. He just checked the alignment of the wall label, tugged at the edge of his sleeve, then moved on, selling the art, missing the artist. Ava felt something knot in her chest, because now she couldn't unsee it. The woman who was being ignored wasn't a mistake. She was part of a pattern, a very old one, a deliberate, curated kind of erasure. Not violent, just smooth, like sanding down a name until it disappears, and then framing the wood. She thought about saying something, about walking over and asking the woman her name, about correcting Greg, but she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she changed course. Quietly. That evening, when a local reporter asked for a quote about the show, Ava pulled them aside and said, "You should ask about the M.L. Rowan piece. That one matters." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "You know who the artist is?" he asked. Ava just smiled, careful. "I have a guess." Then she walked away. In the next hour, Ava began to do things differently. Small things. She moved the champagne tray closer to the back corner. She told the intern to dim the lights near the loudest installation, subtly pulling people toward the quiet piece in the alcove. She adjusted the playlist, less jazz, more silence. No one noticed, but everyone moved differently. And when the critic from the Post showed up, Ava personally guided her toward the Rowan painting, not with urgency, just presence. "You might want to spend a little time with this one," she said, soft but certain. The critic stood there longer than any other guest had, and Lillian, still silent, still holding her handkerchief, stood just a few feet away, not hiding, not demanding, just present, like the ghost the room didn't know it was built on. Ava walked to the hallway after that, pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and typed something quickly before the feeling left. Art doesn't just hang on walls. Sometimes it stands in the room, waiting to be named. She didn't know if she'd ever send it, but she needed to write it down, because tonight, she had seen someone no one else saw, and it changed the way the room moved. And maybe that was the beginning of something. Or maybe that was enough. Greg didn't think much about the woman in the cardigan. Not that night. Not during the show. Not even when someone mentioned, "There's a lot of attention around that piece in the back." He nodded, as he always did when someone complimented something in his gallery, smiled a sharp little smile, said phrases like, "Yes, very special piece, that one," and a rare kind of restraint you don't often see anymore. He was good at that, performing insight, but the truth was, he hadn't really looked at the piece. Not deeply. He'd approved its placement, reviewed the artist's name, briefly skimmed the image file on a PDF. That was all. To him, it had been filler. Nice but quiet. Something to balance the louder works. Something for the introspective types to stand in front of when they needed a break. He never expected it to become the gravitational center of the room, but it had. And now, that shift was becoming undeniable. The first sign was the murmurs. People weren't just glancing at the piece. They were returning to it, pausing, leaning in, whispering to one another, then walking back with someone else. That didn't usually happen. The gallery's usual rhythm was quick admiration, a glance, head tilt, a sip of wine, and a move to the next bold color or provocative title. But this piece, it slowed people down. And more unsettling for Greg, it made them quieter. They weren't posing with it. They were absorbing, and he couldn't quite figure out why. At 8:47 p.m., a man from a local collector's circle, someone Greg had been trying to impress for months, pulled him aside. "What's the story behind a Rowan piece?" Greg blinked. "Well," he said, stalling. "Emerging talent, deep emotional palette, strong instinct for..." "No," the man interrupted. "I mean the artist. Where's she from? Any previous shows? Is she here tonight?" Greg hesitated. He didn't know. He hadn't asked. He hadn't thought to. And for the first time that night, he felt something. Not panic, not embarrassment. Something quieter. The beginning of being out of step with his own room. Meanwhile, across the gallery, Lillian stood near the same bench, arms crossed now. Not defensive, just holding herself. More people had begun to look at her, not because they recognized her, but because they were starting to sense that something about the painting and her presence connected. The energy had shifted. She could feel it in the way people gave her more space, in the way their eyes lingered a second longer than politeness required. No one said anything yet, but the math was working itself out. Quietly, inevitably, a woman approached her. Soft-spoken, mid-40s, journalist type, voice like she asked questions for a living. "Excuse me," she said. "Sorry to bother, but are you connected to the artist?" Lillian looked at her, and for a long second, said nothing. Then yes. The woman waited. Lillian didn't elaborate. That was all. But the woman nodded like she understood anyway, and walked back toward the crowd, not with certainty, but with a story beginning to form. Greg finally walked over at 9:03 p.m. Too late to take control. Too early to pretend he knew what was happening. He arrived in front of the painting with practiced interest, hands folded behind his back, head tilted just so. He did what he always did, glanced at the label, then the frame, then the corners, as if inspecting the way it sat on the wall. He didn't see Lillian at first. She had stepped just slightly to the left, out of the line of sight. But then he did, and the moment held. Just for a second too long. Their eyes met. Nothing dramatic. No big reveal. But enough. He opened his mouth slightly, closed it. He didn't say, "You're the artist." He didn't say anything. But in the look, in that tiny, flickering moment of recognition, the truth landed. It was her. The woman he'd brushed past, dismissed, warned, overlooked. The one whose painting was anchoring his whole show. And she hadn't needed to raise her voice once. He tried to recover. "Beautiful piece," he said finally. His voice was steady. Too steady. Lillian nodded. "Thank you," she said, but not like a grateful guest. Like a homeowner accepting a compliment on her own walls. He stood there a moment longer, then moved on. The conversation was over, and he hadn't been part of it. Back near the office door, Ava watched the whole thing unfold. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, but she felt something settle in her chest. Not justice, just truth, finally visible. And that was enough. In the final hour, something unusual happened. People stopped talking. They didn't leave. They didn't fidget. They just stayed still, looking. Lillian stood in front of the painting one last time. She didn't pose. She didn't perform. She just stood, back straight, hands loose, the way you stand beside something you made with your whole self. And the room, without knowing it, turned around her. Not in applause, not in spotlight, but in gravity. Greg left early. He said he had another appointment. He didn't. He just needed to step out of the room where he wasn't the most certain person anymore. No one followed him. No one noticed. And that, more than anything, is when it truly landed. The morning after the show, the city felt the same. Same sirens. Same uneven sidewalks. Same flyers taped to light poles with peeling corners and promises no one kept. But something in Lillian was different. It wasn't pride. It wasn't vindication. It was steadier than that. Like a door that had been stuck for years, finally sliding open. Not loudly, but all the way. She made tea the way she always did. Old kettle, chipped mug. 2 slow breaths while the steam curled up. But this time, she didn't sit. She stood by the window, holding the cup in one hand, her other resting on the edge of the frame, looking out. Not searching, just seeing. On the table sat the event program. Folded, creased. She hadn't meant to take one. It had been handed to her by someone at the door as she was leaving, a gesture too automatic to turn down. She unfolded it now. Slowly. Page 4. Featured works. Untitled M.L. Rowan. Mixed media. 30 by 30. An evocative piece from an emerging artist. Quiet and raw. The artist chose to remain anonymous. She stared at that line for a long time. The artist chose to remain anonymous. Except she hadn't. She'd signed the piece. Quietly. Clearly. L. Moore in the lower right corner, like she always did. The pseudonym was only used for submission. They'd made the decision to omit her. Not out of malice, but out of habit. It wasn't personal. That was what made it worse. She walked to the corner of the apartment, where several more paintings leaned against the wall, stacked like stories, waiting for someone to read them. Some had been there for years. Some she'd forgotten she painted. She reached into the stack and pulled one out. A deep indigo background. A rough shape of a child's silhouette, dissolving into the dark. She painted it after a dream she couldn't shake. The kind that stays in your muscles longer than your mind. She carried it to her work table, took a brush, dipped it in black acrylic, and over the faint initials LM, she painted one bold name, Lillian Moore. She didn't hesitate. That was the decision. Not a confrontation, not an email, not a headline, just signing her name, fully, and meaning it. At the gallery, things were different now too, in small, scattered ways. Ava noticed it first. There were more questions about the painting than any other in the show. Emails from attendees. One from a regional art magazine. A message from a university asking if the artist would be open to a panel discussion on hidden labor in contemporary art. But no one knew how to contact the artist. They'd listed her as anonymous. They'd built a mystery. Now they were trapped in it. Greg didn't say much, but Ava could see the discomfort building. Not panic, not yet. Just the quiet, mounting weight of a story slipping out of his hands. 3 days later, Lillian returned to the gallery. She didn't call ahead. She walked in around 2:15 p.m. A slow hour, midweek, quiet foot traffic. Ava was at the front desk. She looked up, and this time, she smiled, real, wide, a little breathless. "You came back," she said. "I did," Lillian answered. Ava stood. No clipboard this time. No script. "Would you like to see the painting again?" Lillian shook her head. "I've seen it enough." She opened her bag, pulled out a padded envelope. Inside, a typed letter. Clean, direct. She thought about handwriting it, but decided clarity was more powerful than nostalgia. It read, "Dear Greg, thank you for including my piece, Untitled, in the recent group exhibition. While I appreciate the exposure, I noticed that my name was omitted from the public materials and wall text. Going forward, please ensure that my full name, Lillian Moore, is credited with the work. If anonymity was assumed as a marketing choice, I do not consent to that narrative. I paint quietly, but I do not exist in secret. Respectfully, Lillian Moore." Ava took the envelope, didn't open it, just nodded, as if holding something important. "Do you want me to give this to him directly?" Lillian smiled. "No rush. Just make sure it's read." A pause. Then she added, "And make sure it's kept." As she turned to leave, Ava called out, "Ms. Moore?" Lillian turned. "I hope you submit again. For the next show." Lillian tilted her head. "Why?" "Because we need your kind of quiet," Ava said. "It makes people listen different." Lillian didn't reply. She just nodded once, then left. Back at home, she opened her notebook, the one she hadn't touched in months. She wrote, "Painting doesn't need permission, but names deserve space. Mine does." She underlined it, then closed the book, and began preparing a new canvas. No pressure, no deadline, no gallery in mind, just a new space to begin again, this time without hiding. That was the decision. One small thing, but in rooms built on erasure, even a signature can shake the walls. The gallery didn't collapse. No walls cracked. No headlines ran. But something shifted, and the ones who paid attention, really paid attention, began to feel it first. It wasn't loud. It never is. Greg noticed it during the staff meeting on Monday. He was halfway through reviewing numbers from the opening show, complimenting Ava on the turnout, when he paused. The room was too quiet. Usually, these meetings buzzed, assistants nodding too quickly, interns pretending to take notes. But now, no one was speaking unless prompted. Eyes flicked toward Ava more than toward him. He finished the agenda early, dismissed everyone, and when Ava stood to leave, she didn't make eye contact. That was new. The inbox began to reflect it too. Subtle things. Questions from a local university. We're reaching out regarding Lillian Moore. Does the gallery represent her officially? A message from a well-known curator. We'd like to include Moore's piece in our upcoming catalog. Could you confirm her contact details? A donor. Would love to acquire the Rowan piece, but only if we can speak with the artist directly. That voice, it's real. Greg didn't have the answers, because he'd never asked the questions. For the first time in years, he was behind. Not in sales, not in logistics, in story. And story was what he sold. On Thursday afternoon, he approached Ava's desk. She was organizing paperwork, headphones out, face unreadable. Greg stood there a moment before speaking. I read the letter. She looked up, waited. I didn't intend to erase anyone, he added. Ava gave a single nod. But you did. Silence. Greg glanced around, like looking for a softer exit. We'll correct the label. Already done, Ava replied. He blinked. It's hanging now, she continued, with her full name. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't push back. He just walked away. Lighter on his feet, not from relief, from exposure. That same day, 2 interns stood near the back alcove, looking at the newly updated label. Untitled, by Lillian Moore. One of them, Jamie, whispered, "Wait, wasn't she the woman in the sweater?" The other one, Ravi, nodded. Yeah, Greg tried to shoo her. Jamie winced. Damn, they didn't laugh. They just stood there, a little quieter now, a little more aware of the gap between who speaks and who gets spoken over. Back in her apartment, Lillian didn't know any of this. She didn't need to. She was painting again. The canvas was whiter this time, not because she wanted to say more, but because something inside her finally had the room. The palette was deeper too. Less hesitation, more weight. She didn't think about how it would be received, only how it felt to make. Ava did reach out once. A short email. Ms. Moore, just letting you know, the label's been updated. People are noticing. Quietly but clearly. Thank you for showing up, even when no one saw you. Ava. No response came, but that was okay. Not all things needed to be acknowledged out loud. Some were already standing in the room. Later that week, a woman who had attended the gallery opening returned. Mid-50s, white hair cropped short, glasses sliding down her nose. She stood in front of Lillian's piece for 20 minutes. Didn't take a photo, didn't check her phone, just stood. Then asked the intern on duty, "Is the artist local?" "Yes," Ravi replied. "She was here on opening night." The woman nodded, then whispered, "I think I stood next to her and said something stupid." Ravi didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. And that somehow was right. A man who'd passed Lillian without a word that night sent an email days later. He didn't know how to reach her, so he sent it through the gallery. To Ms. Moore. "I don't expect a reply. I just want to say, I saw the painting. Then I saw the name. Then I remembered you standing there. I wish I'd looked earlier. I'm looking now. DS." Ava forwarded it to Lillian. She didn't reply. She just moved the message to a folder labeled Real Ones. The next time Lillian stepped outside, she didn't feel taller. She wasn't walking with swagger, but the sidewalk felt different. Not softer, but more hers. The city hadn't changed. She had, because something she made quietly, without anyone's permission, had walked into a room and shifted its center. And the room had felt it, even if it didn't know what to call it yet. That's how power moves. Not with noise, with presence. And now, no one could say they hadn't seen her. Not anymore. 3 weeks passed. The gallery rotated in a new exhibit. Something louder, more commercial. Bigger canvases, bolder strokes. Names with hashtags already built in. But Lillian's painting remained. Not because it was scheduled to, because no one wanted to take it down. Every time someone suggested removing it, the energy in the room shifted. Subtle, but felt. So it stayed. They moved it to the front alcove this time, not buried in the back. Now, it was the first thing people saw when they entered. The gallery's regulars noticed the difference. There was a reverence around that corner now. People didn't speak as loudly near it, didn't pose for selfies. They stood quiet, measured, like they were in the presence of something not made to be consumed, but understood. Greg said little about the decision, but Ava noticed he didn't resist it either. The ripple had started, and trying to fight it would have made more noise than letting it carry him. In her apartment, Lillian got a letter in the mail. Not email. A real letter. Thick cream paper. Handwritten. It was from a woman who had visited the gallery after reading about it in a community paper. Someone in her 70s. Former teacher. Had taken a bus across the city just to see the painting. The letter read, "Ms. Moore, I stood in front of your piece for 40 minutes. I don't know how to explain what it did. I was in a room full of things, but yours was the only one that felt like it saw me back. I hope you're still painting. If you are, please don't stop. M." Lillian read it 3 times, then placed it next to her brushes. She didn't frame it, didn't pin it to the wall. She just kept it nearby, like a steady hand on her back. She got another message, this time through Ava, from a young girl, high school age, had visited the gallery on a field trip. Her email was raw, unpolished, but something about it stuck. "Hi, I saw your painting, and it made me cry, and I didn't even know why. I want to make things like that someday. Not for likes, just for breath, I think. Thank you for breathing out." Lillian didn't respond, but she whispered thank you to the room when she read it. Just once. That was enough. Meanwhile, Greg was invited to speak on a local arts panel, a discussion on voice and visibility in modern curation. He accepted, of course. But the day before the event, he called Ava into his office. "Would you join me on the panel?" he asked. She looked up slowly. He continued, "You've been closer to the community engagement. You have context I might not." It was the first time he'd admitted that. Ava nodded, but she set one condition. "We talk about the Lillian Moore moment," she said. Greg hesitated. Then, okay. That was new, too. At the panel, someone asked about the most meaningful piece they'd exhibited that year. Greg paused, then said honestly, there was a painting that changed the way the room moved. It wasn't about sales. It wasn't even about style. It was about someone walking in quietly, and the rest of us realizing we never asked her name. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The ripple was already moving through the crowd. 1 month later, the gallery received an inquiry from a national museum. They wanted to feature Lillian's piece in a traveling exhibit on Voices Reclaimed, artists who refused to disappear. Ava reached out to Lillian with the news. Lillian declined. Politely, gently, firmly. "I appreciate it," she wrote. But that painting already did what it needed to do. She didn't paint for attention. She painted to survive. To remember herself when the world tried to edit her out. Now, people were beginning to remember her too. And that was enough. Still, the world kept echoing. A small arts college added her work to its curriculum. A podcast about unseen artists reached out. A neighborhood center asked if she would speak to a group of young girls about art as memory. She said yes to that one. Not because she needed to be heard, because the girls needed to see someone like her not asking for permission. The final ripple came quietly. Late afternoon, overcast sky. Lillian was walking home from the corner store, bag of tea and bread in hand, when she heard someone call gently from behind. "Excuse me." She turned. A woman, well-dressed, polished, maybe late 30s. Familiar face, but not immediately placed. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "I think I was one of the people at the opening. I didn't speak to you. I didn't see you." "Not really." Lillian said nothing. The woman nodded, almost to herself. "I see you now." Then she walked on. No dramatics. No apology speech. Just a sentence. A shift. A ripple that reached the shore. That's how it works. You make something quietly. You carry it. You place it in the world, not to demand, but to declare. And the world shifts. Not instantly, but steadily, like water against stone. And one day, the stone remembers who carved it. The gallery was quieter now. No events, no wine, no press. Just the hum of air vents and the soft creak of floorboards when someone shifted their weight. The new exhibit had opened 2 weeks ago. Brighter, louder, all curated chaos and conceptual neon. It didn't matter. People still came asking for the one that wasn't there. They asked in murmurs. In the last show, there was this one piece. A figure in the dark. Or, I came late. I didn't catch the artist's name, but it stayed with me. And the staff would point to the photo, now framed near the front. A print of Lillian's painting, with a small brass plaque below it. Untitled, by Lillian Moore. On loan. On purpose. Unforgettable. It wasn't for sale. They didn't ask anymore. Back in her apartment, Lillian had returned to her rhythm. Mornings were still quiet. Tea still steeped too long. Brushes still leaned against the jar like tired soldiers. But something was different in the silence now. It didn't echo. It resonated. She painted most days. Not for a deadline. Not even for a show. Just because her hands still had things to say. But she painted slower now. More breath between strokes. More pauses between pieces. Not from fatigue, but from freedom. She no longer painted to prove she existed. She painted because she already knew she did. And now, so did everyone else. Ava still checked in occasionally. Not to pitch a project. Not to chase a headline. Just to say, someone asked about you today. Lillian's replies were short. Sometimes a thank you. Sometimes nothing at all. But always received. Always felt. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, she went back. To the gallery. Not for anything official. She just wanted to see it again. Not the painting. The room. The way it had changed. She didn't wear anything different. Same cardigan. Same bag, a new scarf maybe, but only because the wind had gotten sharp. She walked in through the side door, where the bell didn't ring. No one greeted her, but this time that was okay. She wasn't there to be welcomed. She was already inside. She moved past the new work quickly. Polished pieces, heavy on intention, light on soul. She didn't judge them, but she didn't linger either. And then she found it. Not the painting, but the photograph. Framed near the desk. Soft lighting, simple frame. No fanfare, but it stood like a stone in the center of a stream. Quiet, unmoved by the flow around it. She stood there for a while, just breathing. And as she did, someone approached. A young woman. Couldn't have been more than 20. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at the image. Then at Lillian. Then back again. And then gently. "You're her, aren't you?" Lillian didn't nod. Didn't deny it. Just looked. The girl smiled. Then whispered, "Thank you." And walked away. No cameras. No applause. Just that. Enough. She turned back to the door. Past Ava on the way out. They exchanged the smallest of glances. No words. Just something like warmth. Like knowing. Like home. Outside, the rain had slowed. Not stopped. Just softened. She walked home with the same weight she always carried. Her bag. Her scarf. Her years. But it sat differently now. Because she no longer carried invisibility. She carried presence. That night, she didn't paint. She didn't write. She didn't do much of anything. Just sat by the window, watching the city breathe. And for the first time in a long time, she felt no need to move. Because the world had finally turned in her direction and stayed there. That's how some stories end. Not with triumph. Not with tears. Just stillness. But this time, stillness that sees you.